Exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly to the force.
Broadcast from later, recorded in Free Space, Toronto. This is the prototype of a program by the researchers and strategists at From Later, a venue for us to discuss all things future, to look at the landscape of future studies, strategic foresight, speculative design, and design fiction, and other forms of near and long-term futures thinking. We're going to get into the radar section of Broadcast from Later, and with that, a bit of collective weak signal scanning. Everybody was supposed to bring in a signal. So Valdez, what's your weakest signal? The weakest signal currently on your radar?
My weakest signal, I told you guys earlier, which was the H&M, some kind of a logo on one of their shirts or a bag or something.
Outfitters, right?
Urban Outfitters?
Like
Yeah, maybe it was
what you
Urban
told us,
Outfitters
yeah.
or whatever, H&M, Urban Outfitters. And it just said, modernity didn't work. I think it's such a weird little weak signal. It's very ambiguous. Who knows what it means.
What's modernity a technology for?
Yeah, for, I don't know, extraction and
Extraction.
convenience and stuff.
Probably, yeah.
But the thing I brought in, I guess, kind of relates to some kind. Well, not actually. It doesn't relate to a post-colonial situation, but was like the rise of like undersea mining, which is like crazy. How it's like divided up and how they're like deciding who gets allocated what, and it all takes place in this like office in Jamaica actually, where the ISA is located, which is like run by the UN for divvying up undersea territory, because how do you split up the sea? Like, how do you allocate rights for that, right? Yeah. And it's interesting, only like 20% of the sea is mapped, like the underground terrain, and less people have been in the trenches of the sea than have been in on the moon. Actually, James Cameron was one of the people who's been in the deepest part of the sea.
Right. Is he getting his hand in the mining at all?
No, he was. I think he was. I don't know what he was collecting. A lot of people are interested in like bacteria in the sea, because it's like 100,000 times the atmosphere. Or
Pressure,
yeah. The pressure is like crazy huge. So whatever can survive down there is definitely like a weird alien life form that like we don't know much about.
Yeah, weren't they like bacteria that were like extracting energy from thermal?
Yeah.
And, like,
Right.
I think that's one of the theories of like the advent of life too, right?
Yeah.
Is like those thermal ducts. I think they've. I'm not sure what they think about that anymore.
So what are they mining?
Rare minerals and stuff like that. Apparently, cobalt is like quite common under the sea. And so a lot of these mining companies actually are positioning all of their work as being like an ethical choice to like
As opposed
automate.
to copper.
Yeah, as opposed to the DRC. Yeah, which is where a lot of cobalt is coming from.
Yeah.
And so they position themselves as kind of like green, ethical, sustainable, cowboy frontier of mining. But it's really interesting, actually, the stuff that they're building for it, and the amount of money flooding into it is huge.
The infrastructure must be like,
Yeah.
really epic.
And there's like a multiplier of how much mining, how much minerals there are in under the sea versus land based. Like it's way more is down there.
And is it like, what does it look like to do that? Is it like an oil rig? Like where
they're
you have
like
a platform on top and then like these essentially like
No, I think
giant
they're
elevators?
No, I think they're mobile. They're just digging up, from what I understand, at least right now, just like the silt in the first like 5 feet or something, and it's like the way they catch fish. They just have like boats and they just drag
like trawlers.
like a trawler, and they just trawl and then they suck it all up to the top and then they just dump it all back. They extract all the minerals and then they dump it back, and it creates big plumes and stuff like that.
Oh man, I wonder. It must be devastating for some of that marine life.
Yeah, they don't fully know.
I don't know yet.
Yeah, they don't know.
It's unclear. So it's unclear if it's an ethical choice or not.
Yeah.
But that's interesting as far as being a signal, because signal for ethical virtue signaling, but
Yeah.
more the signal
Yeah.
for potential new. I mean, maybe the energy technology that saves us, if it is these microbes that are able to survive and generate energy, and at that level, I don't know.
And energy for us, like the minerals are used in like batteries and
And
things
then,
like that.
yeah,
Like
and
there aren't
then-
even enough
Yeah, and
minerals to
then-
make the batteries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting weak signal.
What's your weakest signal, Udit?
So my weak signal it's probably weak in the West, but it's actually a pretty strong signal in the East, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to bring that here. And I called it stubble trouble.
Okay.
And stubble is crop stubble. So right now, India has 9 of the 10 most polluted cities in the world, global polluted cities in the world. And one of the main contributors to the pollution, air pollution, is the stubble burning. So crops, when you harvest them, so paddy and wheat, when you're done harvesting the grain, you have to burn down the stubble that's remaining, which is like the stalks of the plant, because that's the fastest way to clear it. And it seems like the growing season has shortened because of global warming, and so they all have to get the stalks out of the way to clear up for the next round of sowing, and they all burn it at the same time, and then
Wow.
the entire northern part of the country is like covered in smoke. My signal is actually a bunch of new technologies and processes that are using the stubble to try to create like an economic incentive for people, instead of burning them, chopping them up and using them in some other way. So IKEA, for example, has just recently launched a stubble line of home products. So they have like stubble mats, stubble pots, and stubble furniture. So it's giving a resource to an incentive to these farmers for, instead of burning the stubble, they can harvest it and use it in this product. It's also being used to grow mushrooms, which is an interesting one. And a third one that I found just a couple of days ago was there's this Harvard atmospheric chemist who's using stubble to make this new air conditioning system in India, which is fascinating. And essentially it's like a passive screen that you put on these windows, and it directs air in a certain way that it cools it down when it enters the home. So it's a really low cost air conditioning system, and which is also interesting because people are worried about how to cool down a country like India,
Yeah.
and like the greenhouse effect. So it's sort of like a double whammy. You're like taking care of the stubble, creating this resource, and using it to cool down homes.
Asia, what's your weak signal? What's on your radar?
My weak signal is my colleague zine. It's called Towards an Intentional Intersectional Practice. And basically her thesis was looking at the ethics in socio-technical systems and the role of the designer. So what she developed a curriculum that basically supports designers to be self-critical before and during the design of a product or a service, so that, they don't necessarily like either skip designing for a whole demographic, or at least become aware of the demographic that they're not designing for. So I thought that this was really interesting because, I feel like Kimberly Crenshaw and a bunch of other like Black feminist writers have been writing about intersectionality and how to use it in design and in everyday life, but I think that hasn't necessarily been like directly directed towards the designer, like an individual designer, as like something that they can use for their own professional development. And and I think the point that Jackie's making in designing this as like a easy to put in your pocket meme, like zine, not a meme. It's something to take serious.
Are they like principles? Is it like a
Yeah, it's
scorecard? Is
yeah. So it's like basically it has 6 steps. 1, show up. 2, learn and unlearn. 3, contextualize. 4, question. 5, apply, and 6, evaluate. It is not enough to say, well, we tried. Intersectionality is about accountability. Hold yourself accountable. Basically supporting people who are designing for wide populations to be self-critical in challenging ways that might, make them uncomfortable at first, but it's going to do a lot more people a lot better in the end. So this is a plug, not as shameless because it's really awesome. But I'm really interested in this too because there's so much design out there that is not made for not even just people of color, but like people with disabilities, people with different abilities, people with intersection, identities that are not necessarily covered by most of these tech.
Do you have an example of something that you think is really well designed for the kind of context that you're talking about? I don't want to put you on the spot.
You put me there, and I am feeling the light. Let me think about it. I feel like actually, I can't necessarily think of something that's really, really well designed, but I can pull out something that was like well intentioned, but was also still not well designed.
Okay, what's that?
Not to shame University of Toronto, but at the University of Toronto, I went to a disability talk the other day, and at the University of Toronto, if you're a person with a disability that goes to University of Toronto, they have specific resources for you to be able to access so that you can maybe have like somebody to help you with note taking or maybe have like different access to the library or different access to resources to support you in your academic endeavors. But in order to access that, you have to fill out a form, then you have an appointment, and then they determine whether or not you are you can actually access that resource. And by the time that assignment might have passed, there's a waiting list to access that. So there are resources, but there are hurdles to access that resource. So that is a design, like a service design that was well-intentioned, but not designed,
Not as well thought out.
Not as well thought out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so just to be able to ensure people have access to that became a barrier. So I'll have to think about one that was actually really well designed but until then, I feel like we can all whether or not you're designing for many people, or if you're really just trying to be critical of your own, motivations in design, I feel like it's a good resource to, support people to be self-critical.
Did you bring a weak signal, Rob?
I did bring a weak signal. Tangentially related, it's an AI design product where you often are hearing about the biases of these AI systems, and imagine you would in design as well. This is sort of, I don't know if it's a weak signal, it might be a stronger one. Definitely something I've been tracking is just how AI is being used for drug discovery in the pharma world. So the first the first drug molecule invented by an AI system has entered clinical trials recently. So this is a molecule that's been used for the development of a drug that treats OCD by a company with, as often is the case, some kind of unpronounceable name, Exscientia. It's an Oxford-based startup. They worked with a Japanese pharma firm. The startup also works with Bayer and a number of other big pharma companies. But apparently the drug development path took less than 12 months, and it usually takes 4+ years to get to clinical trials. They were able to narrow the solution space of how many compounds they tested to 350, and usually it's 5 times that apparently by using the AI system to hone in on that. So there's all these sort of examples of generative design and AI being used for design and doing some of this, with the right parameters, doing some of this trial and error work and landing on the most promising sorts of potential solutions. But this seems to be an example that things are moving pretty quickly in this regard. So what that could mean for progress in terms of what happens and how we're using pharmaceuticals, and in this case, the particular variety that's like treating our states of being mentally.
But couldn't you say that like plants or something have always been a form of AI that like over the, hundreds of thousands of years we're testing out different compounds and like
They were doing
we
that?
haven't to ward off like fungi and bacteria
Mm-hmm.
and like all these different threats and things like that, and it's like we've had AI for a long
It's been
time,
there collaborating with
And-
us.
yeah. And it's narrowed the
AI,
solution.
you're talking about ancestral intelligence.
No, artificial.
I
right?
love that.
Her and the plant. Yeah.
No,
I
it's a
love
natural.
that.
Plants are natural.
Yeah,
Natural
and
intelligence.
she provides us medicine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it depends on what you mean by artificial, but
As
yeah.
a non-human, maybe.
Yeah.
Yo, did you guys watch that documentary on Netflix called Pandemic?
No.
Is it
No.
Pandemic? Yeah, I think it basically came out the same day that like
The coronavirus.
the
hit.
coronavirus hit. I was like, oh shit, yo, Netflix is on
Suspicious.
something.
Netflix is on.
Yeah.
Is on it.
What
But-
would be better for them
Timing
than
the
to
drop.
have everybody quarantined?
God, it's frightening. But anyway, the reason why I brought that up is because in the documentary, there's a team of researchers that are developing a vaccine that could be useful for any virus ever. So we could like have a post-virus world.
Huh.
And I wonder if like they're basically saying, oh yeah, like by 2025 maybe this could go to market. But I feel like
Sounds
something
suspect.
like this. I know. So it sounds bad suspect.
Yeah.
Like
But this you would be designing solution as these things come up, right?
right.
There's
Yeah.
also like a lot of talk about antibiotic resistance right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a really big thing
It-
that the people in the public health space are talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
So what we gonna do, guys? Are we gonna become like Bubble Boy and just?
None of it works.
Oh God.
You need to build
But going back to
Yeah.
AI for drug discovery, I'm kind of excited for when we'd be able to fully do some of the, like not just like the discovery, but also the testing with AI. So imagine like simulating a human
Mhm.
in like in tech and just like testing out some of the biochemical reactions and so on in like a simulated space instead of doing like animal testing, for example.
Right.
Which is what
Yeah.
they do right now.
When that work's also very much underway, I guess, with the like organ on a chip, body on a chip
Yeah,
stuff,
exactly.
as well as, I mean, in some way that's got to be what's going on in this. Plus robots that are like doing the chemical mixing and biochemical mixing and some of these types of
Like
things, which is a little
automating the
different,
lab
but like that's just
processes.
automating the same lab processes, but it saves time in a similar way.
Yeah, shout out to OpenTrons for
Open trons, yeah, true.
building the automated lab.
Yeah. So that was my weak signal. It's definitely something I want to continue to watch. To your point, though, Asia, yeah, as far as the scenarios that are out there right now, it seems like everybody, the sort of fear mongering is all around climate.
Yeah.
Not to like say that it's a bad thing to be thinking about different alternate climate futures. It's great, but the like superbug future is something
Yeah.
else to worry about, and it doesn't seem like there are as many futures out there right now.
Futures.
And we're gonna take a break right now. We'll be right back. Broadcast from.